Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime News. I'm Philip Hilton. Street traders in Nottingham say their livelihoods will be snatched away from them if plans are agreed to move them off their city centre pitches. The City Council says the traditional flower and fruit and veg stalls detract from Nottingham's image as a shopping mecca.
Good evening. A 9-year-old reporter who broke the story about suspected murder in a small Pennsylvania town is defending herself after some locals lashed out about a young girl covering violent crimes and said she should be playing with dolls.
Tell us what the situation is there right now.
Well, we've just had the law enforcement helicopter fly right overhead. I'm sure you heard it through the microphone here. This is still a very active scene here this afternoon. They have now roped.
The 9-year-old girl found the 19-year-old's body right where I am standing.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Those stories and more when we come back.
And Big Brother, as well, of course, as 5 News, has been owned by the media tycoon Richard Desmond. After 3.5 years, he sold it to an American company at a...
Hi, thank you, Shane, for that. In my opinion, I think that this 9-year-old girl shouldn't be playing with dolls if she...
So far, there has not been a break in Republican ranks.
Well, I think that things will evolve as people get familiar with Judge Garland's record, as it becomes apparent that the overwhelming...
Interviewing witnesses from the murder mystery. What do you guys know?
I was walking my dog and I saw a guy looking quite suspicious, so I decided to detour the other way. Yeah.
Excellent choice.
We were just standing here having a chat in the park and then we heard a scream. Yeah. So then Victoria called the police.
I was an Africa correspondent with the Argus Africa News Service. I spent a lot of my time in Rhodesia covering the political story. I got to know a lot of the black nationalist leaders, including Robert Mugabe, who then became a very good friend.
This country is in a state...
So we're leaving the student council, which is a pretty big deal really, and it means basically the students aren't going to get as much publicity in the newspapers.
Prevent what it called institutionalised abuse. Our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt reports.
Too often left hungry, thirsty, in pain and ignored. Today's report says elderly residents at Orchid View nursing home near Crawley endured appalling care. Neglect directly contributed to the deaths of 5 people, including Jean Halfpenny. She was overdosed on the drug warfarin. Staff then shredded records to cover that up. Her daughter is one of the relatives who now wants a public inquiry.
When you hear, the stories of the 19 other families, it is really shocking that our elderly and vulnerable people are just left unprotected, and that just those involved are...
We will now hand over to our field reporter Charlotte Kelly, who can tell us more.
I'm here live at Henley College to find out about the opinions of students on leaving the US.
It's okay. I've booked a call and I accept for 5 minutes before.
Clegg's plans that we've just been hearing about. They have an interview with him just after 7 o'clock. That's on Breakfast. Hello, you're watching BBC World News. I'm Naga Manchetti. Here are the top stories. The President of Ukraine is to convene a special cross-party commission to try to resolve weeks of political crisis. The announcement follows a day of clashes in Kiev as riot police confronted anti-government protesters. One of Syria's main opposition groups says it's pulling out of peace talks unless the UN retracts its invitation to Iran. Beth McLeod says that some countries only want Iran to attend under certain conditions.
The United States has really been opposed to Iran attending, and the State Department has just said that it wants Iran to publicly accept that the aim for this conference is to find a transitional political body for Syria. Otherwise, its invitation to attend the talks should be withdrawn by the UN.
The EU and United States will suspend some of their sanctions on Iran in a few hours if a UN nuclear watchdog confirms it's reduced its uranium enrichment, or the move is part of a deal to curb Tehran's nuclear program. And at least 4 people have been killed in Pakistan by a suicide bomber in the city of Rawalpindi near Islamabad. The blast hit a crowded market near the Army's national headquarters, one of the most secure areas of the city. It's time for Sally and I to take a look at which stories are making headlines around the world. Let's begin with the Financial Times. It's reporting on the ongoing protests in Ukraine. The latest spark, or new anti-protest legislation, which the newspaper says has produced some of the most violent scenes since the protests began.
The temporary lifting of some sanctions against Iran makes the front page of today's Wall Street Journal. It says that many companies will start looking to do business with Tehran.
Britain's Guardian covers the last-ditch attempt by a group of tech giants to derail plans to close down international tax loopholes. Some of Silicon Valley's biggest companies, including Google and Amazon, have been fighting the changes.
Gulf News reports on China's condemnation of a new US spending bill. The bill was passed into law last week. It limits the amount of tech purchases from China over fears of cyber espionage.
And good news for those of us in Britain who like a bit of sunshine. The Daily Telegraph is highlighting the end of soggy summers. There's a change in ocean currents. It could, and I stress the word could, bring sunnier climes to our shores. I tell you who'll be happy about that is Jonathan Charles.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, you'll believe it. He holidays in the UK, so fingers crossed for your British holidays. Anyway, Director of Communications for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
Naga, Sal, very good to see you as ever. Yeah.
This is an area, the Financial Times covering the protests in Kiev in Ukraine. This is an area you are very familiar with.
This is clearly a very important moment for Ukraine. I mean, if you look at the Financial Times, they say the upsurge of violence there has taken the protests to a new level, and I've spent a lot of time in Kiev over the last few months. It's very clear that now the country has to reach some political accommodation. But beyond that, it needs to move forward on the economy. I mean, the EBRD is the biggest single foreign investor in Ukraine. We know the country very well. We've just produced a transition report which talks about countries being stuck in transition, countries that have not really progressed the way they should have done over the past 20 years. Ukraine is one of those. It needs to improve its business climate, but it can't do that until it gets over these political problems. But if it doesn't improve the business climate, if it doesn't get investment in, and investors have not been...
Breaking news. Ethiopia faces its worst flood in 50 years and the UN warns people, don't go there.
Hello, yes, we're here at Henley College and I'm joined by the head of the Student Council to talk about vandalism in the school.